Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. As you know, we are talking today about breast cancer prevention. This event obviously is being hosted by Premier Medical Centre and the UniDoc in conjunction with Breast Cancer UK, and we are truly honoured today to have Sally Martini with us. She is the CEO, so the big dog of Breast Cancer UK. Breast Cancer UK is a fantastic UK charity which focuses on the prevention of breast cancer, and they do lots of education and research regarding this. Today's webinar actually coincides with a very important date in their calendar, as it's their 20th birthday this year. So happy birthday and congratulations to Breast Cancer UK. I'm really honoured that you have come to speak to us this evening. From looking at your website, I can see what an amazing resource it is, from looking at the patient stories and all the information you have on your preventative measures as well. This is the first time we are hosting the webinar using this software, so I apologise in advance if there are any glitches. There is a slight delay between us talking and it coming out live to you. During this event, if you want to ask any questions, there's a question box that you can type your questions into. The question button looks a little bit like a question mark speech bubble. It has a question mark inside it. So if any questions come to your mind during the event, then please feel free to type them in there, and then we will come to them at the end of the presentation and see what we can answer. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Sally, and we'll get started on this evening's event.
Thank you very much, Kimberly, and thank you all for coming along tonight. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share with you our breast cancer awareness webinar. So I'm Sally Martini, Breast Cancer UK, and as you've just heard, we are a breast cancer primary prevention charity, and we are entirely focused on providing support and education to people around how they can reduce their risks of ever developing breast cancer, but also for people who've had a diagnosis. We also provide information around how you can reduce your risk of having a recurrence. Now, I'm expecting to be joined today by my scientific research officer, and that's Patricia Bischoff. Can I just check that you're there, because I can't see?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Great. And the reason Patricia's joined us today is that she'll be able to answer some of your scientific, but also some of your questions around diet and nutrition, because Patricia is a nutritionist as well. So without further ado, our presentation today will be about 30 minutes, and as Kimberly said, please send us your questions. You can also send your questions through to our email here, info@breastcanceruk.org.uk. And of course, please do visit our website, because there's lots of material there, but you can do that a bit later. Now, before I start, I want to share with you some quite important information, and that's that this webinar is really aimed at people of all ages, so men, women, and people who are going through various stages in their lives. But I also want to make it clear, because we often have young people who attend these, and prevention is very important for young people, but it's important for young women and young people in general to understand that your risk of breast cancer, of developing breast cancer at a young age, is extremely low. And really, breast cancer, like all cancers, your risk increases the older that you get. But it's a very good time to start talking about prevention when you're young. It's a perfect time, but it's also important to remember that prevention is important at any age. So let's get started with our webinar. And I'd like to start really with the good news, and that's that over 25% of breast cancers are indeed preventable. Now, knowing that some breast cancers are preventable is the very first step, and then the next step, of course, is understanding why, and importantly, what we can all do now and throughout our whole lives to reduce our risk of ever developing breast cancer in the first place. So let's start by looking at how common breast cancer is. So according to the World Health Organization, breast cancer is the most common breast cancer in the world. Here you can see it in the little pink wedge, and that's also true in the UK. Now, what's very interesting about breast cancer is that it's more common in affluent countries such as Australasia, Western Europe, so that also includes the UK. So it's more common in more affluent countries than poorer countries such as South Central Asia, the Middle East, and some parts of Africa. And in fact, the rates of breast cancer are actually 4 times higher in richer nations. However, the incidence rates are starting to creep up in those poorer regions too. So looking at this graph, what it does is it shows breast cancer incidence and mortality rates for women in the UK. And these records started from 1971. What you can see is that this goes all the way up to the last time that we had an update for UK figures, which was in 2014. And the breast cancer rates have steadily increased since 1971 through to that 2014 time. And then we can see a slight dip. Now, in 2017, we had 54,700 cases of women who were diagnosed with breast cancer in that year, and around about 390 cases in men, because yes, men do get breast cancer too. Now, it's not all bad news, because the mortality rates have gone down quite significantly since 1971 by a whopping 35%. So today, 80% of women who are diagnosed with breast cancer will go on to survive for 10 years. But there are still too many deaths from the disease, with around 11,500 women dying from the disease every year. So what does that mean for the average woman in the UK, and what does it mean for young women and women of all ages? And how likely are we to develop breast cancer over our lifetime? So if you look here, in 1996, it was estimated that a woman's lifetime risk was 1 in 12. But today, if you were born after 1960, then your lifetime risk of developing breast cancer is 1 in 7. So I want to reiterate the point that I made earlier on, that the risk of developing breast cancer at a young age is extremely low. These figures here are actually taken from a US study, but they're quite representative of what we see in the UK as well. And so if we look at someone at the age of 20, their risk of developing breast cancer is 1 in 1,732. And then progressively over the decades, our risk increases until we reach the age of 80, where our risk of developing breast cancer in the next 10 years, that is 1 in 8. So the really important thing to remember here is that it's all about taking action now to reduce our risk of developing breast cancer in the future. Now, I mentioned earlier on as well that men can get breast cancer too, although it is very rare. And the lifetime risk for a man of developing breast cancer is 1 in 870. And it's not all bad news, as I've been saying all along, because while men are also able to develop breast cancer and women have a higher risk of developing breast cancer, we strongly believe that there's something we can all do to reduce our risk of ever developing the disease. But before I talk about that, let's have a quick look at what causes breast cancer. So breast cancer, like any other cancer, results from mutations which accumulate in the DNA of our cells, and the DNA tells our cells what to do, including how the cells should grow. Now, every time new cells divide, the DNA, which makes up our chromosome, is copied, and it should be copied exactly each time, but sometimes mistakes can happen. Now, sometimes the DNA gets damaged, which can lead to mutations, but our bodies are prepared for this, and our chromosomes include a DNA repair gene, which can actually fix mistakes. And if that isn't possible, what it does is it tells the gene to kill off the abnormal cells. But sometimes this can go wrong too, and when mistakes don't get fixed or when abnormal cells are not killed off, then the error or the mutation is reproduced. And over time, these mutations accumulate, and their combined effect can lead to cancer. Now, the more often a cell divides, the greater the risk of mutations happening and accumulating. So what's really important is that anything that can accelerate the rate of division can also increase our likelihood of mutations occurring. So put quite simply, cancer happens when abnormal cells grow in an uncontrolled way. Now, sex hormones play a really important role in breast cancer. And by sex hormone, we mean estrogen, progesterone and androgens such as testosterone. Now, estrogen and progesterone are responsible for female sexual development and also the reproduction. And they're also made in women's ovaries, That's before women reach the menopause, and then they're made in the placenta during pregnancy, and in small amounts they can also be found in men's testes and other organs. Excuse me, but before menopause, women have much higher levels of estrogen. Excuse me. Now, estrogen can increase how often cells divide. So as breast cancer, as we have higher concentrations of estrogen, that can play a role in developing breast cancer. And androgens and testosterone are responsible for male sexual development and characteristics, and they are mainly made in the testes, but they're also found in women's ovaries and in adrenal glands of both sexes. Now, what's interesting, excuse me, got a dry throat. What's interesting is that estrogen has a very similar structure to testosterone and androgens. Now, what's important to note is that a lifetime exposure to high concentrations of sex hormones, now particularly estrogen, can increase our risk of developing breast cancer. So what is the cause of breast cancer and why has it increased so much in recent years? And the answer is that there's no single cause and not all causes are understood. In fact, there are many factors involved in whether or not a person goes on to develop breast cancer. Excuse me. But we call these risk factors. And usually the risk factors are a combination of risks that can lead to breast cancer. But on the other hand, there are also factors that can protect us against breast cancer. So the two most common risk factors for breast cancer are being a female and aging. And these are examples of what we call intrinsic risk factors, or risk factors that we can't change. Now, in the UK, 83% of breast cancers occur in women over the age of 50. So the older a woman is, the greater the risk is of developing breast cancer. So quite simply, aging increases the risk of nearly all cancers, and that includes breast cancer. Also, being a woman means that we have lifetime exposure to estrogen and also more breast tissue, which can itself become cancerous. So we've talked about aging, how that can increase our risk, and we've also talked about how being a woman increases our risk, but there are other factors that increase our risk. And so one important factor is family history and genetics, and that makes up 20 to 30% of cases. And incidentally, if you've heard of the BRCA gene mutation, they only make up 2 to 3% of our risk of developing breast cancer. Now, there are other factors which increase our risk, and those are tall stature and heavy birth weight. And both of these we think are associated with increased levels of growth hormone. Also being young at first period and having a previous diagnosis of breast cancer or a benign breast disease, and being older at the age of menopause and having higher breast density. So that means the breast has lower proportion of fat tissue and a higher proportion of fibrous or glandular tissue. And this can be detected through a mammogram. And finally, a higher level of circulating hormones such as estrogen can increase our risk of developing breast cancer. So now let's have a look at the risk factors that we can do something about, and we call these potentially modifiable risk factors. So maintaining a healthy weight at any age is really important for your health. Now, at a young age, we really don't have the evidence around whether being overweight can increase our risk. But what we do know is that after menopause, being overweight or obese does increase our risk quite significantly of developing breast cancer. Because after menopause, the place where estrogen is found is in the fat cells. So being overweight increases the levels of estrogen, and we know that that is a known risk factor. So the important message is to stick to a healthy weight all of your life, and that will also help reduce risk of other diseases. But it's also very important to think about what we eat. That can also have an impact on our risk. Now, we know that a poor diet with not enough fruit and vegetables can also increase our risk, and eating a lot of processed meat, such as bacon, can moderately increase our risk of developing breast cancer. Now, there are other risk factors, which include alcohol, because when alcohol breaks down in our body, it produces a chemical which is known to cause breast cancer. And this can also happen in the breast tissue. And it also increases the amount of estrogen which circulates in our body, and that can increase our breast cancer risk. So the more alcohol you drink, the greater the risk. Sticking to the alcohol guideline is definitely recommended, but actually avoiding alcohol altogether is safest. Now, other things that can increase our risk are synthetic sex hormones found in HRT or the contraceptive pill. Now, once we stop the contraceptive pill, we no longer are at risk. Other risk factors also include living in a city compared to living in the countryside. That can increase our risk. And this may be partly as a result of air pollution from traffic and industry, which can contain many harmful chemicals. Now, working at night or having exposure to lots of light at night can slightly increase our risk. And we think this is probably a result of reducing levels of melatonin in the bloodstream, and melatonin controls circadian rhythm. So that's our body clock, and it also is anti-estrogenic, so it can inhibit breast cancer development. Now, smoking increases the risk, especially in premenopausal women, and smoke is a well-known carcinogen. And finally, ionizing radiation exposure, that can increase our risk also, and the most common source is from medical treatments such as chest x-rays, especially during puberty. But unfortunately, most of the time, there's nothing we can do about that, and often there's a better reason for doing it than not doing it. Now, the next thing that I want to talk to you about is hormones and endocrine disrupting chemicals. So our endocrine or hormone system is important for regulating lots of our biological functions, such as growth and development. And we have around 50 different hormones in our bodies. So what are EDCs? Well, they're endocrine disrupting chemicals, or any chemical mixture or a mixture of chemicals that can interfere with any aspect of our hormone action. And they are made outside the body, so they are generally synthetic. So looking at this diagram here, you can see there's lots of hormones in our body which EDCs can potentially interfere with. And several of these hormones are linked to breast cancer risk, such as sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, which we all talked about earlier. Now, EDCs often act in very low concentrations, and that's very similar to how hormones act. And EDCs can damage our health in lots of different ways. It depends on which hormone is being disrupted. So, for example, they may increase our risk of diabetes, of cardiovascular disease, and cause infertility, as well as other hormone-related cancers. Now, EDCs were first identified in the 1970s in the US by scientists who saw reproductive changes in wildlife, in polluted rivers and in lakes. And by the 1980s, scientists from other parts of the world, including the UK, also saw changes in wildlife, mostly in sewage ways. For example, they found male fish who contained eggs and testes. So that was both female and male characteristics that they found in those fish. Now, what they later worked out was that this was the result of chemicals found in sewage that were made from synthetic estrogens. And in 1991, the term EDC was coined to describe this very large and very complex group of chemicals, which are all mostly synthetic. And EDCs are known to be widespread in our environment, and we can find EDCs in water, in soil, in air, as well as wildlife. And they're even found in polar bears in the Arctic and penguins in the Antarctic. And they're usually synthetic, these chemicals can hang around for quite a long time as well. And sadly, EDCs are also found in our bodies, mostly in tissue and in blood fluids, and many EDCs can bioaccumulate, which means that they can take quite a long time to leave our bodies. And when we're exposed in our life is also quite important to EDCs, and the most damaging effect of EDCs are seen when exposure happens in the womb and during early development. So many chemicals found in our everyday products are actually EDCs, and some can mimic the actions of natural estrogens, and in doing so may increase our risk of developing breast cancer. So I'm going to show you a few products that may contain EDCs that you would see all around you. So we have parabens, which are used as preservatives in cosmetics, or aluminium in antiperspirants to reduce sweating. We have certain pesticides such as the weed killer glyphosate. We have PFAs used in food contact materials such as takeaway packaging. Then there's the antimicrobial agent triclosan, which is used in some brands of toothpaste or in liquid soap. There's brominated flame retardants, which are routinely used to make furniture and furnishings more flame resistant. Then we have phthalates, which are used in perfumes, and finally bisphenols, which are used in the manufacture of polycarbonate water bottles. So as you've heard in the webinar so far, throughout our life we are exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals from all around us, and really there's not much we can do about that exposure. However, the issue that we're concerned about is that the current safety assessment only really looks at individual substances on their own. And this is a problem because in reality, we are exposed to a combination of chemicals, which we call a cocktail effect. And this can lead to harmful effects, even if single substances in the mixture are present at concentrations which we would normally say are safe. So what can we do about it? So definitely remembering all of these chemicals is going to be tricky, but don't fear, we have lots of resources available. Here I'm showing you an example of our flyer that you can download from our website. And I recommend you start here because it'll give you lots of information on how to reduce your risk, but it also has a really nice little section that's entitled chemicals to watch out for. And it's a good place to start to look out for those chemicals to avoid and to find when you go out and select your products. Now, another place for you to look is on our Prevention Hub, which we have just released. It's a brand new individualized prevention tool, which is designed for you to go in and look at your own personal circumstances and also the areas that you're interested in, and you can develop your own prevention plan. And the kind of information you'll get alongside it is information such as this to help you to choose products and avoid EDCs. But the really important thing to remember, particularly as a woman, is that we already have a lifetime exposure to estrogen. And so limiting exposure to EDCs as much as we can, those EDCs that mimic estrogen, is a really positive move towards reducing our risk. There are also some apps out there. There's more and more apps available that you can use and scan products when you buy them, and they give you a rating, both in terms of how healthy your food is to eat, but it also looks at chemicals that go into products. So it is becoming a lot easier now to find ways to avoid. And there are lots of alternatives to products that contain EDCs as well. So there are several well understood protective factors also that can help protect us against developing breast cancer. And these include eating a diet that's high in fruit and non-starchy vegetables. And an example of that is a Mediterranean diet, which can protect against breast cancer. And that's because it's full of colourful vegetables which are rich in carotenoids and high in fibre, and all of these things are protective. Now, a recent study also found that women who work outdoors have a lower risk of developing breast cancer. And the reason we think is associated with increased vitamin D levels, because the main source of vitamin D actually comes directly from the sun's ultraviolet rays. So spending a bit of time outside in the sun all year round can help reduce our risk. Of course, doing it safely and making sure that we avoid having too much exposure. Now, the other thing that can help reduce our risk of breast cancer is breastfeeding and having children at an early age. These can protect us, and having more children and breastfeeding for longer can give us increased protection as well. Now, if exercise were a pill, it would be one of the most cost-effective drugs ever invented. So said Dr. Nick Carville of Oxford University. Well, he was absolutely right, because regular exercise or any other type of physical activity not only helps prevent a range of illnesses, which we all know about, such as heart disease, but it can also prevent breast cancer and can also prevent breast cancer recurrence, and it increases survival following a breast cancer diagnosis. So it really is a magic pill. And so why is that? Well, it usually reduces body fat and lowers the levels of hormones such as estrogen, which circulate in our body, but also hormones such as testosterone and insulin. And it can also strengthen our immune system, which helps protect us against developing cancer. And there's more good news, and that's that all types of physical activity are protective against breast cancer. So this includes exercise such as brisk walking, running, weight training. Basically, the more you do, the more you're protected, no matter what age or what gender. Now, less vigorous activities can also help reduce our risk. Things like doing the housework or the gardening, they are also very, very beneficial, and you can do a little bit more of that if you're not doing vigorous activity to get the same benefits. So your likelihood of getting breast cancer is associated with many risk factors, which we've talked about, some of which are protective, and some of them are, increase our risk of developing breast cancer. And it's how those two interact with each other which will determine whether or not someone goes on to develop breast cancer. And so we've talked about lots of things we can do to reduce our risk, which may make us feel a little bit overwhelmed. So the important thing to understand is that because there are so many different things that we can do and how they interact with each other, it's the small changes that really can help make a difference. So I'm going to give you a quick list, go through again, just as a reminder of the key things you can do to reduce your risk. So eat a healthy diet, lots of fruit and vegetables, and little or no processed meat. Maintain a healthy weight throughout your whole life. Exercise regularly. Don't smoke. Avoid alcohol. Get a little sun exposure, especially during winter, but really all year round. Minimize taking synthetic hormones. If you do have children, breastfeed if possible, and think about having your children before 30. And then also avoid EDCs in everyday products. So either use fewer products less often or check the ingredients labels. And as I said, there are ways in which you can check the ingredients. You can get a list from our website, but also there are quite a lot of very good apps out there as well to help you and guide you. Now, finally, there is another really important line of defense that we all have control over, and that's to be breast aware. And being breast aware is very important at all stages of our life and for all men, women and genders. And we at Breast Cancer UK, we've got a resource that we've developed that's also available on our website that can show you the signs to look for and also how to check your breast. And I'm going to walk you through that now. So healthy breasts come in all shapes, sizes and densities, but it's also important to recognise when something's not right. Now, to discover the early signs of breast cancer, you need to check your breast at the same time every month and avoid your periods when you do check. And breasts can change throughout the month, so it's good to check them at the same time every month. So the first thing to look for is a range of changes that might happen in your breast, and these include swelling, inflammation, dimpling, or rashes. And then also look for changes in your nipple, including a sunken nipple, a crusty nipple, or any discharge from your nipple. And finally, look for changes that you can feel, such as lumps which are fixed or movable. And to check your breast, lift your arm above your head and walk your index and middle finger around the whole breast in a spiral motion, including under your armpit, and repeat on the other side and around your collarbone as well. And it can help to stand in front of a mirror while you're checking as well. Now, the good news is that 9 out of 10 breast cancer, beg your pardon, 9 out of 10 lumps are completely harmless. But if you do find one, then do go to your doctor and get it checked straight away. and speak to your doctor. So now really it's over to you to start your own breast cancer prevention journey. I mentioned to you earlier on that you can do this by going to our brand new prevention hub. And if you go to breastcanceruk.org.uk, you'll find the hub there, and you can start your journey, starting with a quiz. So you put in your own information. The questions will be very, specific to you, and then based on that, you can walk through and look at ways in which you can develop your own personal prevention plan. So it's for everyone. It's for young and old, male, female, and whether you've had a scare or not, whether you've already had a diagnosis or not, it'll help you find out more about what you can do to reduce your risk and also that of your family and your friends. And it's free, easy to use, and it's always there for you to pick up on when you're ready. So at Breast Cancer UK, we also fund research, I mentioned to you earlier on, so we can better understand why breast cancer develops and how we can prevent it. And then we also talk to government and to MPs to help them understand what they can do at a government level to help better protect the community. And what you can do is you could support us to continue to fund our high quality research so that we can better understand the causes of breast cancer, but also you can support us to reach more people with our education on how to reduce our risk of breast cancer. And that's it from me, but I'm hopeful that you might have some questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I've learned so much just there. We've had quite a few questions come up already, but I also have come up with a few myself, so I hope you don't mind if I jump about the place a bit. Let's start by looking at the questions that have come in. So we had a question asking about breast cancer in men, but I think you've probably covered it with your slides. So if there's anything specific you want to be on that, please send us in another question. Next one is about plant estrogens. I'm also interested to know this. I am never sure if plant estrogens are good or bad because I feel like I've read both.
That is a really good question, and I think I'm going to hand that over to Patricia, who will be able to put her scientific hat on and give you her scientific opinion on it.
Hi, yeah, so I think you mean isoflavones, which are found in soy foods a lot, such as tofu. So currently it's unclear if a soy-rich diet protects healthy women against breast cancer, although some studies do say they may, or it may. Soybean is rich in these compounds which have properties that can be both protective but also cancer promoting, but there's no convincing evidence that consumption of soy increases risk. And so generally, like moderate consumption of soy, meaning like 1 to 2 portions per day, is considered positive for our health. And soybeans also contain a lot of unsaturated fats, vitamin B, calcium, and they are all generally beneficial to our health. So eating tofu and whatever is out there it's okay, it's good, yeah.
Sorry, I just realised I was muted. Going on from that point, is the advice the same for men? Do you know?
So I can't tell it exactly, but I would say so. Yeah. Okay,
that's good to know. There's a question here about the diet, but I think you've probably covered it. There's a question about cosmetics. So I'm not going to ask you to name and shame, but I wonder if you can recommend any companies that you know are very conscious about these compounds and therefore making steps to, stay safe. Is there any companies that come to mind that you can perhaps recommend us look at?
It's a difficult one because we don't endorse any companies, and so there's probably one piece of advice, maybe one little plug that I would do, and there's a lady called Helen Addis, and she started up the C list, and the purpose of her C list was to kind of bring together products that are safer for particularly people who have had a diagnosis with breast cancer, who maybe have had reconstruction surgery or other interventions, and would like products that are safe and you know, low in toxicity. Now, what's good about her website is that a lot of the products on there are good. But I think the best approach for you to take, and it's pretty easy now. I mean, I do this all the time. I've got the app. I go in, and there is an app which, again, we don't endorse this app, but it's called Yuka, and but there are other apps like it. And I go, every time I go into a shop, if I'm about to buy something that I like, I will zap it with the app and it will give me a rating. And anything over 80 is generally good. And it will also give you a list of what EDCs are in there. It actually lists the EDCs. It lists other things as well. So it's increasingly easy now to go and choose products. And there are lots of products out there that are safe.
So we don't have to just go and panic, like open our tab and basically panic and throw everything out.
Definitely not. No, one step at a time. And, you know, it really is a combination of things. So, you know, having one or two bad products in your cupboard isn't going to be something for you to panic about by any means. But what we say is that because, again, as women have, we have a high circulation of estrogen throughout our whole lifetime. If we can take any steps to reduce that circulation of estrogen, then that's a positive thing.
It's certainly food for thought, because I don't think this is something that we learned about in medical school, really. I don't think it was in anyone's mind when they were teaching us about breast cancer. So this is all new stuff for us. Let's go on to the next question. So someone's asked about having copies of the slides. I don't know if you're comfortable sharing with them. I think a lot of the content is on your website already when I had a look.
Yes, I would recommend people go to our Prevention Hub, because everything they've seen here and more, actually, our Prevention Hub is much more sophisticated than this, and it has all of the information. So we've got one section that's a guide on everyday life. So all the information I gave around diet and reducing risk factors and exercise and so on. And then we've got another section that's our chemicals eye guide as well. So all the information on chemicals is there as well. So I really recommend that you go there, and you'll probably find it more straightforward than the slides I've shown you.
I actually had a little play on your Prevention Hub earlier. I did the quiz, and I loved how at the end it basically gave me like a prescription of everything I needed to sort out, which was quite a lot, to be honest with you. So it's useful because especially on the exercise front, I know I'm definitely lacking at the moment, and it's the interesting comment you made about it reducing breast cancer recurrence. I don't think we're emphasizing that enough to patients. So that was a really helpful little reminder there that we should be encouraging exercise.
Yeah, and we also have actually a webinar, a very brief webinar on the benefits of exercise on our website as well. And there, in fact, Patricia put that webinar together, and there's more information around the positive impact on people who've had a diagnosis.
Oh, that's fantastic. Great. So we've actually got a question from a student midwife who has asked about nipple discharge, how they kind of decide what's normal and what isn't when it comes to nipple discharge. This might be more of a clinical one, but if,
I think I think that's one for you, Kimberly.
Yeah, possibly. So this is a tricky one, because as a midwife, you're probably dealing with people that have had babies recently, so we wouldn't be too surprised if there was nipple discharge. And we also know that a lot of women, if they give their breasts a bit of a squeeze, even a decade after they stop breastfeeding, they can sometimes still express some milk. We worry about discharge that's coming from just one breast over both of them, because we think if it's coming from both, it's less likely to be a breast cancer, for example. It's often instead related to hormonal changes. But I think ultimately, if a mum is coming to you and she's concerned, then I think it's worth getting her to speak to us, because I think ultimately an examination would put all of our minds at ease. So don't be scared to direct patients to us so they can be examined. We get quite a lot of questions, or maybe just me because I'm a female GP. As female GPs, we get lots of breast questions, so don't feel like you can't point them our way. Let's look at some more questions. So we've got a question here saying, are there things I should think about for my 2-year-old to reduce the risk in the future? So you mentioned in your presentation about those critical time periods kind of being like in utero and early development. what if we're a little bit late to the party? Are there obviously still things we can do to help, but in that kind of young age, is there anything that comes to mind?
I think really the advice is the same for any age, and so the information around when the critical time is for reducing exposure is important, but the advice we provided around reducing exposure to chemicals, so using fewer chemicals, is probably the quickest way to do it, and then for cleaning our home, for example, bicarbonate of soda is a wonderful replacement, and there are lots of other alternatives we can use within the house that are probably more effective than some of the more expensive products. But then equally, it's about looking at what you're buying and just becoming aware of the ingredients in all of your products, and that includes toys, that includes clothing as well, because so we talked a little bit about brominated fire retardants, and fire retardants are really popular in the UK. They're used in furnishings, but they can also be used in clothing, and so it's important to look at the labels of the clothing bought for children in particular. Make sure that some of the lists that we've listed of the chemicals to look out for are not in there.
Gosh, it's really quite worrying in a way, isn't it? What we're potentially exposing our children to. And we can't really plead ignorance now that you've highlighted this to us either. So now I'm going to have to go around my whole house.
Yeah, and you have got that. The information is there, and I think that's a good thing. What we're excited about is that we've been able to provide this detailed information, and then hearing your feedback will help us make sure that we get it to you the way that it makes sense to you as well.
Yeah, it's been so interesting with these compounds. It's worried me now, so I'm going to have a big clear out of my house this weekend, I think. We have got another question, which is kind of a sciencey one, so hopefully you can help with this one, because I'm not sure I know the answer. But Agnes has written in to say, is a family history of any type of cancer a risk factor, or is it only if there's a history of breast cancer in the family?
Do you want to answer that one, Patricia?
So I know that occasionally there's a strong connection between breast and ovarian cancer, when either is due to a gene mutation such as the BRCA gene, which you might have heard of. I think you call it hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome. So if one of the cancers is hereditary, then your risk is significantly increased for both cancers. I don't know about the other cancers. I would have to look that up though.
I'm similar. I only know about the BRCA. So there's BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations, which mean that you have in families you tend to see these clusters of ovary and breast cancers. I think there might be some other kinds of cancers too, but certainly breast and ovary are the two that, if it seems to be running through families, we start thinking about whether genetic testing is needed. That's normally led by the breast or gynecology team, actually. They're normally the ones that flag to us whether there may be an issue that needs looking into. But yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's like, as you said, as far as I know, I think it's just breast and ovary that are potentially linked in some families, but I think they make up the minority of breast cancer cases.
And I think in a way, the other thing I suppose that surprises people is, breast cancer is the most common cancer in the world, and because it's so common, it's not necessary, a lot of people think, oh, have I got a family history? But actually just being a woman and getting older, being postmenopausal, increases our risk of developing breast cancer. And the figures we've got show that family history, and it's mostly family history linked to breast cancer, it makes up 30%.
Okay, gosh, that's quite a significant number. So it really does run in families. We've just had another question come in asking about COVID. So this might be more one that we answer here. So they were asking if any NHS services have been impacted. Are referrals getting longer? So in our area in Brent are what are called 2-week wait referrals. So that's the referrals that we make to the hospital with women who have presented to us with a suspicious looking lump or symptoms that we think might be a breast cancer. We refer them on the 2-week wait rule, which means that patients will be seen within 2 weeks, and that's still happening. So it's certainly they're sticking to that 2 weeks at the moment. I think there were possibly times in early COVID where it was a bit longer, but it's been to 2 weeks, I'd say, for a while now. And as far as I know, the services for breast cancer are pretty much up and running like they normally would be. When it comes to cancers, generally the treatment is, now pretty much up to speed. It's some of the more routine things, unfortunately, that are still have a bit of a backlog. But I'm noticing that my 2 week referrals are coming around pretty quickly. I'm getting those letters back from clinics, and as you mentioned, the vast majority of those lumps that we refer come back as being benign lumps in the breast, so not a cancer. But it's still important that we refer people into the clinics. The clinics that are run by the breast team we call them a triple assessment clinic. So what that means is that you go to the clinic appointment and you'll go through a series of processes. So first of all, you'll normally meet a doctor or a specialist who will take the story from you and examine you. You'll often then have an ultrasound scan done at the same appointment, and sometimes they'll take a biopsy as well at that same appointment. What that means is that you leave that clinic having a fairly confident idea of what's going on. You might have that biopsy result still pending, but you leave there with a bit more certainty than when you arrived. And that's certainly still happening. So as far as COVID goes at the moment, if you have a worry, please come to your GP. We will refer you in. There won't be a significant delay when it comes to breast cancer risks. Let's see if we've got any more questions. I actually have a bit of a random question, which might not be all that relevant, but I was just wondering, in terms of these EDCs, has Brexit, had any impact on kind of like the rules of what's allowed to now come into the country? So I don't know if the European Union was very good at controlling these kinds of compounds and our exposure to them, and perhaps now we've left the EU that we might need to be a bit more conscious of what products are on our shelves.
Well, you're absolutely right that it's something to be concerned about, because as part of the EU, we were part of a bigger system that actually had what's known, the system's called REACH, EU REACH, and it's the regulatory system for chemicals. And it has been developing over many, many years. And what it is essentially is it's a bank of information on all these chemicals that have all been tested. And the way it works is, without going into too much detail, is that when a manufacturer wants to bring a new chemical onto the market, they have to prove that it's safe against all sorts of criteria. And that's how it works with EU REACH. And we were part of that. Now, Brexit actually meant that we are no longer part of EU REACH. So we have created, or the government will be creating, a UK REACH. And in theory, it's kind of a cut and paste job, which sounds fine, but actually it's going to be more complicated. And so we, as a charity, we're working very closely to provide our ask to the UK government around what chemicals must absolutely be restricted. And at the moment, there is a risk that some chemicals won't be restricted, that are currently restricted in the EU, and some of the chemicals I've mentioned. And so we're particularly keen to make sure that the government at least matches what happens in the EU, but actually betters it. And we see this as an opportunity.
That's a good point. Well, I think I'm a bit too quick to put a negative spin on Brexit.
Yeah.
You're right. This is our opportunity now to improve the health of our nation, really, and make sure we're not putting anything in or on or around our body that might be harming our health, especially with regards to breast cancer. We've had another question about whether hysterectomies increase the risk of breast cancer. I'm not aware of any link with that. When people have hysterectomies, sometimes they may or may not have their ovaries removed as well. If you have your ovaries removed as well, then you'll be put into essentially a menopause. So a lot of women would then opt to have hormone replacement, which we know does increase your risk of breast cancer potentially, as Tali mentioned earlier. So I wouldn't say the hysterectomy itself would increase your risk. I don't know if you know otherwise. I can't think of a mechanism.
Patricia, have you got any
No,
thoughts on that?
sorry.
No.
I don't.
I mean, for us, it's the most important data we've got is around weight postmenopause. That is very important information because we no longer, when we're postmenopause, we no longer produce estrogen in our ovaries. the estrogen is stored in fat. So the less fat we have, the less likely we are to have estrogen circulating in our body, which is what can cause mutations. So that's the advice that's probably more important than anything, is making sure that we stick to a healthy weight post-menopause.
So in terms of, you had one slide that you put up which had a long list of the kind of lifestyle things we can do, and I assume they don't necessarily have all equal weighting, so they must give you a bigger bang for your buck than others. Which ones do you think are the really big ones that are worth us tackling?
Well, I've mentioned one, and that's weight after menopause. That's really important. Alcohol consumption, again, particularly after menopause, but at all stages. And so those are the two risk factors, apart from aging, of course, and being a female, but we can't do anything about those two, but the two that we can do something about. And then in terms of protective factors, then exercise has a huge amount of evidence attached to it, as well as a healthy diet. Patricia, is there anything else you think we should point out that's kind of the top of the list?
Yes, just definitely physical activity. No smoking. What else? Making sure maybe your vitamin D levels are good and healthy. But yeah, I would say like having a healthy weight, especially post-menopause, and exercising. Yeah. That's
an interesting comment on vitamin D, because we do find very commonly that our patients are vitamin D deficient. I mean, you can blame the weather. I mean, we had our 1 week of summer already this year. But also a lot of us are conscious about not being in the sun too much because of the damaging effects of UV as well, and the risk of skin cancer. So I think vitamin D, that's a really interesting point that you've brought up there. So I'm guessing then there's a link between low vitamin D and an increased risk of breast cancer.
Yeah, well, Patricia will answer it in scientific terms.
So the thing is, I think research, they don't know it for sure yet, but so they don't know if either breast cancer makes you have low vitamin D levels, or if low vitamin D levels increase your risk of getting breast cancer. They are not sure, but studies do. So my suggestion would be make sure that your vitamin D levels are right and healthy, because it also helps for general health reasons too.
Yeah,
you're so right there. I mean, vitamin D, COVID showed us that it was so important in the immune system. We know it's important for bones. It's often we find people's mood is even lifted when their vitamin D levels are corrected. So the government does suggest that all of us take a vitamin D supplement every day for the winter months at least. And to be honest with you, I think probably all round, if you're not going out in the sun much, if someone's housebound or they're keeping themselves quite covered, then vitamin D is really important to be taking. Fine, so I think we will call it a day there, if that's okay. There is one more question that's come through, but it's quite specific, so I think it's probably worth speaking directly with your GP if you have specifics personally about kind of medicines and so on. So thank you so much. It's been very educational. I've learned a lot today, and like I said, I'm going to be having a big scramble around my house now this weekend to look at what things I need to change at home. So thank you so much to Patricia and Tali for talking to us this evening. I hope that those of you who are able to attend have found it helpful, and this will be uploaded to our website, so that's premiermedicalcentre.nhs.uk shortly, where you can watch it on replay or send it to someone who you think should be watching it, who's missed out today. So thank you again, and happy birthday, and I hope you have a good week. I noticed on Instagram you've been posting that you're doing regular Facebook meetings throughout this week of educational things.
Yes, well, we're doing Facebook Lives. The one on Wednesday is going to be really interesting. It's with one of our researchers, and she'll be talking about her research into EDCs. So if you're interested in that topic, then please come along, because she's terrific. She's a wonderful researcher. She's very good at talking about her research. We'll also be talking to some people who have experienced breast cancer themselves and their stories. And then we also have a mocktail masterclass evening on Friday. If you're interested, you'll find all the information on our website, but please join us for the 20th anniversary celebration, and make sure you check out the hub as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I hope everyone has a lovely evening. See you, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.